If you found that last video confusing, you might have realized at this point in time that if we are talking about a lot of technical domains, there is a lot of technical vocabulary attached with this conversation. And this should not be surprising because we are talking about a technical word. We have technical languages that come with it. We have mentioned this before. The example of the leet speak, which allows this kind of weird slash half visual, half linguistic code for people to be able to decipher secret messages. And as I mentioned back when I first introduced the leet speak, that this is actually a lot easier for humans to decode because it is based on a human shape of the letters rather than what the letters themselves. So the same symbol could be related to a bunch of different letters, and therefore you kind of need to have this kind of human brain to make sense of leet speak. Now, the larger context here is that this is probably a way that we could also relate our existence to an indigenous language and to an indigenous version of existence that exists on the internet. And part of that is because the very specific people that have a role in talking on the internet are part of a very specific generation, a generation of people, not necessarily by age grade, but by access to the internet itself. And you kind of are able to develop this weird fluency to internet talk by spending a lot of time in it, the same way that you develop fluency with any kind of other system in the world. Penelope Eckert, a linguist at Stanford, was especially interested in the way in which teenagers, young generations, are involved in creating language and innovating language in the modern sense. Now, this is about analog language, to be sure. This is not about language on the internet. But if you think of the youngsters, the young generations, as the people that are making the cool languages that kids talk about, and those cool kids are on the internet, that means that a lot of the innovations to be found on the internet will also come from these cool kids. She says in 2003, slang is a term commonly used to refer to lexical innovation by delegitimized groups, among them adolescents, implying a qualitative difference from other kinds of lexical innovation. Although slang is commonly thought of in terms of individual words, it is also generally part of a style. This style may be sufficiently elaborated to be comprehensible only within the community that produces it. For example, the distance of the slang used in the favelas of Rio de Janeiro or Verlan, spoken by a predominantly North African and poor adolescent population in the suburbs of Paris, is an indication of the distance of their speakers from quote unquote a standard society and the extent and the ways in which these slangs transform Portuguese and French give them an insolent and threatening quality. So, an insolent and threatening quality to reading these things. And certainly, if you are not used to the internet, if you are not used to these kinds of symbols appearing in your text, you might find these things a little bit threatening, a little bit scary, perhaps, because these are not the kinds of symbols that you use. This is not the kind of language that you speak. This is not your grandmother's language. And as a result of that, we are able to start thinking about how perhaps language that is currently being used on the internet would end up being a larger force in the way that the off internet language could be influenced. You might have heard of certain quote unquote slang or innovations, if you will, that have made their way into the public discourse. You know, such sentences as on fleek, for example, which is a meme language that started on Instagram and became kind of this weird meme in TV and politics and all kinds of things. And that is obviously not a new thing. This was observed by Naomi Barron in 1984, talking about the general social effects of computer mediated communication. The most important concept for us to understand here is that many people perceive computers and the use of computers as alien, intimidating, and a personal threat. Sarah Kiesler and her associates at Carnegie Mellon University go so far as to characterize the process of learning to use a computer for programming, web processing, or class assignments as equivalent to entering an alien culture. Shoshana Zuboff, 1982, of Harvard Business School, in her studies um, of employees' reactions to the introduction of computers into the workplace, cautions for all their advantages, computers can end up introducing much unintended alienation. Workers feel manipulated by the computer. You have to work the way the system wants you to. A quote from Zuboff. Even managers lose a sense of what they are managing. Now, this is again kind of an interesting insight dating from 1982 into the world that we are kind of living in now, right? The fact that everybody is using computers, but there certainly seems to be that digital divide between the people who are able to use it very proactively and the people who are kind of um, um, going along with it, and perhaps people that are kind of victimized by it, because there are very big differences in the ways in which people will approach this language of the computers, this language that exists on the internet. And that has to do with the very technical, very specific acronyms that exist a little bit of everywhere. This article here points out that although many abbreviations are common to RC and SMU, the social MUD I studied, certain outsider forms are sneered at. For example, U for U, R for R. When I asked LSMU regulars, MUD is multi-user dimensions or multi-user dungeon. It's the role-playing game. LSMU is just a place where you play that role-playing game. What part of the internet do you think abbreviations like "Are you going to see the movie" are from? Two replied, the icky part, the part that I avoid like the plague. One thought perhaps IRC users sometimes use the forms but admitted to an anti-IRC bias. IRC is Internet Relay Chat, another platform on the internet. When one new visitor came to LSMU, apparently used to IRC, and said this is just like RCG, it with fun things to do, Bonnie Irregular responded, except we don't say G here. G. G between square brackets, whatever that means. The fact that MUD, mudding, requires some computer programming skills to do well may account for the perception of Chinese informants that their MUD culture is more sophisticated than the eye of RC. So MUD, multi-user dungeon, IRC, internet relay chats, two different cultures that exist on the internet, each with their own language, with their own ways to communicate. And between these different platforms, different people have different languages or different ways to judge one another. The G between square bracket is a way to say grin. This is just a symbol that people are using to convey the things that they are saying. So in that case, the person is grinning, kind of saying a sarcastic thing, saying this is just like RC, this is just the same thing as what I'm doing, she says judgy, and the other person judges them back. This is obviously something that you can see in the context of emojis, emoticons. Emoticons represent facial nonverbal behavior and may serve at least some of the same functions as nonverbal behavior in face-to-face communication. The basic functions of nonverbal cues in face-to-face communication are providing information, regulating social interaction, expressing intimacy. Nonverbal cues in face-to-face communication may intensify or tone down the emotional expression. Using emojis, emoticons, whatever you want to call that little shruggy guy, is a way in which you are able to convey a little bit more information about your internet language to others if they are not able to understand it properly. Let's say if you are used to a certain site, a certain platform, a certain social media, and you are aware that the way that you use language on this thing is different than the way you use it in other places, or maybe with a different generation, using emoticons is the way for you to convey that the language that you are saying now is maybe not exactly as rough or as rude or even as cute as you might think it is. So you can add a little bit of a visual cue to make sense out of this for other people. And that is, in a way, an easy or approachable way to approach language itself. Because if you have to deal with the variety of people, the variety of websites, the variety of small niche languages that exist in all kinds of places, and you have to make sense out of that without any kind of training, user manual, without any kind of reference to any of this, then the internet becomes once again a wild place where nobody is able to talk with one another. That being said, you may be aware that even emoticons are sometimes complex to make sense out of, and certainly you may have judged people for their use of certain emoticons, perhaps for their use of too many emoticons. You may have been judged for it. This article from 2015 shows how a similar message used or connected to two different emoticons can be understood in a variety of ways. So again, high school students being asked to make sense out of a statement using an emoji, and if they are able to answer this into a certain word, their response would be graded into a variety of ways. So I'm fine, followed with the heart emoticon, is 17% understood as I'm fine, kind of an honest, earnest understanding of it. 4% think his is a caring message. 7% thinks good, feel good, I'm good. 3% think grateful that you care. 1% says love. 6% says happy. 3% all right, the person is okay. 10% as they mean it, honest, sincere. So the emoticon can be understood as a repetition of the message. It can be understood as an explanation for the message. It can be understood as a response to the message. It can be understood as a whole variety of ways. And that's just a heart, a very approachable, very accessible emoticon. Compare that to the right column with I'm fine associated with a pill. 3% happy, 21% sick, bad, not fine, 4% sick, but take medicine, drugs, tablets, 3% drug problems, drug addict or addict, 1% suicidal, 3% sarcastic, ironic sarcasm, 1% psycho, 1% better, 3% fine but take medicine, good but take drugs. So again, one message, one emoticon can be understood in a variety of ways, with most people kind of understanding it in the most opposite way. A person says, I'm fine, but 20% understand it as not fine. It could also be understood as sick, but take medicine, as well as fine, but take medicine. So kind of, again, two opposite messages. So obviously the little wavy equal symbol here means the answers were of about the same kind. So it's not always a perfect match. The equal symbols mean that you have perfect matches. So again, there's a little bit more variety than those particular words being used here, but this is, again, just a summary of how those things are working. And you could think of that in terms of Wednesday's lecture regarding those addresses on the internet, right? The addresses, that is a bunch of numbers that you can use on the internet, and the words that you can use for people to locate those things on the internet with them. You can use a variety of addresses to get to the same website. You can use a variety of icons on the internet to arrive to the same message itself. And the internet, as a result of that, has provided us with a wealth of languages that really only make sense on the internet, at least to a certain extent, to the extent that it is relying on this weird mix of technical innovation and a weird human slash machine legibility. And that is mostly due to the fact that the language as we typically use it is a mixture of a bunch of symbols themselves. This study from 1971 looks at the way in which variety of people understand a variety of messages, with the most important part of understanding a message coming, perhaps unsurprisingly, not from the message itself. One interesting question now arises: is there a systematic and coherent approach to resolving the general meaning or impact of an inconsistent message? Indeed, there is. Our experimental results show the liking of a message comes from 7% verbal liking, 38% vocal liking, 55% facial liking. So the words themselves, as far as this study is concerned, it was an important study, but still just one study, comes 7% from the words themselves, 38% from the voice of the person, 55% from the face of the person. And as you can probably guess, most of that does not exist on the internet. The vocal liking, the voice barely appears, and not the face at all. Emoticons in that case allow us to kind of make up for this gap, to have 50% of our face appearing in some manner, and whether or not that emoticon face replaces our real life face in addition to the 7% message next to it gives us a matter of understanding of the language on the internet, or how indigenous people to the internet understand language. Another innovation that has existed is interrobang. This is here is a kind of a representation of what interrobang is, a combination of an exclamation point and a quotation mark that is used to mark irony. The author, Mark Spector, Martin Spector, created this symbol as a way to make sense of weird, ironic messages that have existed in history. His example is "Land ho" from Columbus. What does that mean? Well, the Spectre, who was in advertising, kind of assumed that this land ho message was a matter of an ironic relationship from Columbus to the space that he sees. He sees land that he has no idea how to approach, and so he makes this statement accompanied with, according to Spectre, an interrobang, a mark that says, I am happy, but I am also not happy. I'm not sure what to say about this, so therefore I use a very specific form of punctuation to make sense out of that. The modern equivalent to all this is tone indicators that exist on certain websites and in certain communities, again, very specific parts of the internet that use tone indicators to convey messages or the actual intended meaning of messages, here demonstrated by River Ramirez. Tone indicators, and this is from the New York Times website, tone indicators allow people to make sure, or at least to try to ensure, that their messages are understood in the way they intend by adding a little bit of code at the end, such as /J/F/B/RH/TA/S. You can make that happen with a bunch of different letters. /J means joking, /F means fake, /P means platonic, /H rhetoric, /S sarcastic, /TH means end thread. So, marking that you are using this in a sarcastic manner, in a joking manner, or whatever, is a way to make sure that people who have maybe a variety of understandings of how other people communicate, and this is especially relevant for neurodivergent people, are able to understand how the intent is conveyed and how the language is working on the internet. Now, let's say that you understand these codes. Let's say that you understand what these tone indicators mean. They are certainly helpful to you, a person who understands the language. They are not very helpful to people who do not understand what they are. They are another more complex layer to language that is not necessary to someone who is used to another complex layer, that is your face, that is your voice, that is the way that everyday language is used on the analog level. However, on the digital level, on the internet, and for people who are used to a language that is used outside of the face-to-face relationship, adding a bit of code is certainly a tremendous help to making sense out of the variety of different ways in which a variety of people might communicate in that space.